To James Kitfield, who is a foreign affairs correspondent for the National Journal. This is the National Journal's cover. We'll show you what it looks like. The aftermath is their cover story, and he has a piece inside that's headlined "The Coming Counterstrike." The capabilities are there to respond to terror, but is the political will? Now, this week, in the past week, we've seen so much rallying around the president with the poll numbers and the like. Why are you raising the question about political will?
I'm raising the question because what this administration is going to attempt here has not been attempted in the past, and it's not been attempted because it's very risky. There's lots of perils involved in it, and it's going to be a very long, hard slog. And the administration and other national security experts have known that for a long time. And thus they've sort of avoided heightening this thing to sort of a war footing. We don't have much choice now, but I think the article tries to point out this is not going to be a sort of precision, throw a few cruise missiles over the horizon type operation. It's something much more complex and risky.
What are some examples of what you've learned of the kinds of plan that you consider risky and complex?
Well, if you just take Afghanistan alone, it is a very, very tough nut to crack. We have tried to use all the diplomatic pressure in the world to get the Taliban to give up Osama bin Laden. They've refused. Everyone expects them to refuse again. So that means you're basically left with going there and trying to get him. And that means ground forces in Afghanistan, which is some of the most inhospitable terrain in the world. A lot of people have gone in there and have rued the day they did it. Most recently the Soviet Union, obviously, in '79 when they went in. So that alone is a tough nut to crack. And everything that this administration has said so far would lead you to believe that they have a much wider sort of campaign against terrorism in mind, and that will impose risk of actually going to war with nations and state sponsors of terrorism. And I think Iraq leads that list. So this could escalate quite quickly if we don't get the kind of cooperation from these state sponsors that they're demanding. They're not asking anymore, they're demanding. And the risk then is if they do not cooperate, they don't go along with what we have in mind, we'll look ineffectual if we don't do something to punish them for that. So there's the risk of escalation in this is quite severe, I think.
As we switch gears here, our new topic is on the U.S. response and what are some of the opportunities for that, and also some of the repercussions that might have in the future. Obviously, as we just heard, a further aspect of this is the American public willing to sustain a campaign of this sort if it takes time, money, and blood over the course of the next few years. Phone lines are open. We want to go to calls in a few minutes for your questions. For James Kitfield, who is with the National Journal staff, this is his article, The Coming Counterstrike. Let me read you one paragraph from his piece. Once such a war is joined, the American public should steel itself for a long and bloody struggle that will likely include multiple military operations on many fronts, possibly with significant casualties on both sides. There is every danger that such a struggle could escalate into a war against another nation, one that supports or harbors terrorists, or in a worst-case scenario, against a wider alliance of state sponsors of terrorists. Will you expand on that, please?
Well, again, we know the State Department puts out a list every year of 7 countries that support terrorists, and it's the usual rogues gallery, but we're going to be telling all of those people that it's untenable now for you to keep doing this. It's unclear yet how successful diplomatic pressure will be on that, but if we get the wrong answer, we've put out a lot of very hard rhetoric that there will be consequences to that. And I think the administration is doing a lot of groundwork to lay the diplomatic ground, build a huge coalition to put extreme pressure on these countries to finally stop doing this. But if they do not do that, and you should be reminded that, you know, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighters. So are we going to tell Syria and Iran, for instance, to stop supporting the groups that launch attacks against Israel, for instance, the Hamas and the Hezbollah? Exactly how wide a net we're going to throw on this is not absolutely clear, but if it's a war on terrorism writ large, it's a pretty big plate we're putting in front of ourselves.
In the past decades, Americans have become accustomed to American response being American jet fighters dropping bombs in what's often called surgical strikes, and then it's over in a few days. In addition to this larger campaign, do you think there is a desire on the part of Americans for something to happen very soon that's visible? And is that likely to happen?
I think there's clearly the desire to strike back sort of in a spasm of anger. And we may yet, I mean, I've speculation out there that something in 10 days to a week. My own reporting and talking to people that are sort of close to the administration, close to the military option, think that would be a mistake. This needs to be done deliberately. We need to do the coalition building. It's going to be the most crucial thing, so we get as many friends on board with this effort as possible. They've gone a long way with getting NATO to invoke Article 5. I mean, that was a key thing here. It seems like they're laying the groundwork for Russia and China to not at least give it a thumbs up, and if not to participate. Certainly China would not participate. I would not believe. If China and Russia will come along, then you have the UN Security Council, basically. So they're looking to sort of prepare the diplomatic battleground here first. That's going to take time. And I would think they're going to have to move significant forces into the region to back up whatever threats they make. And they're making some pretty strong threats. And that's going to take time, too, a matter of, weeks and months. So I personally, my opinion is you will not see something very fast. It would, first off, look ineffectual, because anything you can do very fast is not going to be very effective. Lobbing cruise missiles will just sort of disturb the bee's hives once again, send everyone into hiding, and really accomplish very little. It would also, I think, reacting in sort of a spasm of anger would make the coalition building much tougher, because people would think you're just lashing out blindly. Let's do this sort of in a deliberate way, and that's what I anticipate them doing.
We have a line set aside for people watching outside the United States, wherever that might be today, and that number is 202-628-0205. It's very helpful for all of us in the U.S. to hear a perspective outside our own country about the response. And don't forget, if you are dialing us, use the U.S. international dialing code before attempting those numbers. In fact, our first call for James Kitfield is from London. Caller, you're on the air.
Hi, I'm a Pakistani, and I would like to state my opinion on whether or not the current regime in Pakistan should be involved in the fight. This is a regime of thugs. These generals are absolute thugs. They're the same people who have, over the years, managed to get 60% of all tax revenues into their coffers every year. General Musharraf is an absolute crook. He's got 6 plots of land in Islamabad. Where did he get the money on his army salary? It's a low. These people are thugs. They're the same people who killed 3 million Bengalis. They killed 3 million Bangladeshis before Bangladesh separated itself.
All right, sir. Well, let me ask you a question, though. With that observation, then, what options are available to the United States? Should we not be working with him at all, or how do we ensure trust?
No, absolutely shouldn't be. You should be working with the alliance, the Northern Alliance. In the short term, you don't have many options, because this is going to be a long-term war, okay? What you really need to do is, on all the Western countries, all the free countries, is help Muslim countries to develop secular institutions. Every time a secular institution tries to build itself in Pakistan, there's killings. Right now, there is a doctor who's going to be killed. And all he said was that Muhammad was not a Muslim until he turned 40. That's when he started to get his revelation. He's going to be killed because he's being accused of committing blasphemy.
Okay, I need to let you go. Appreciate your input. And Mr. Kitfield, if we have some international callers that you'd like to ask questions of, I'd welcome your questions as well. Okay, his point of view. The leaders are thugs, shouldn't be doing business with them. Focus on our allies.
Well, he raises a couple of really good points, one of which is I think in the long term battle here will be to build secular institutions and to try to promote to the degree possible governments that respond to their people in these regions, because clearly the root causes of terrorism are people who feel like they're desperate, they're poor, and they have very little to say about how they are governed. Having said that, in the short to midterm, Pakistan is the key. The Taliban was created basically by the Pakistani military and intelligence services. They continue to be supported by them. So we are forcing General Musharraf to make a choice here, and so far he has seemed to go along. But it's a very difficult choice for him. There are many in his military and intelligence community who are strong supporters of the Taliban, who supports bin Laden. And it's an unstable situation in Pakistan. And if we do something, I mean, the risk here is that we will sort of lead to instability in his own country. The radical fundamentalists could take power, and if they do, they have a nuclear weapon now, and that's the worst case scenario. The worst nightmare is to have the jihad have a nuclear weapon. So we have to be very careful, but we are forcing him to make a choice here, and I think that is the surest sign of our serious intent. We would not be, and that's one of the risks involved. That's one of the reasons we have avoided this kind of thing in the past, because there are lots of risk involved. But they have made the assumption, which I think is probably rational, that these guys are plotting the next spectacular attack. We have to do something now, and Pakistan, where it concerns specifically bin Laden and the Taliban and Afghanistan, are the linchpin.
Linton, Indiana.
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
I've been monitoring all the events that have been taking place since the tragedy last Tuesday. I'm a little bit concerned. I have not heard anyone address a problem that I think we have, along with the security measures that we're now heightening in our airports and probably some of our businesses, I would imagine. But it disturbed me to find out that a lot of these suicide bombers had expired visas. I'm just wondering, is anything being addressed at INS for tightening down our tracking of where all these people are? I know if you're in a foreign country, if your visa expires, they come and find you. And I'm just curious if we're maybe investigating this area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My response to that is, I think Mr. Cheney said in an interview yesterday that everything has changed, and I think that is probably the operative prism through which to view all this. I think everything is now on the table by this administration to figure out how first to avoid this kind of thing being able to happen again, and then to proactively go after the people who did it. And I certainly think that the INS and our porous borders are going to get a very hard look. It's basically the easiest thing in the world to come into America and to continue, as we saw with this case, to live in our communities for extended periods of time with or without visas, with expired visas. That's going to get a very close look. Now, the solutions aren't easy, because we love our freedoms in this country, and we should not be willing to give those up, but I think they will all get a hard look, and the INS is certainly going to get a very hard look here.
USA Today reminds us that Dick Cheney, Colin Powell, Paul Wolfowitz, and Brent Scowcroft were all at senior roles during the Persian Gulf War, and now are in senior or even higher roles than they were then in this administration. What are the pluses going into the situation with that experience?
It's interesting, because a lot of people have commented that this security team seemed to stumble out of the gates a little bit. They took some actions that the rest of the world interpreted as being very unilateral, and some people, they were criticized in many quarters for being sort of having their worldview sort of frozen back in the 80s in the Cold War mindset. Two things that I think are going to be made very apparent here shortly are they are having now to reach out. In this coalition building exercise, which Colin Powell is leading, they are having to reach out to friends. They've realized very quickly that they need friends all around the world to conduct this kind of fight. So I think unilateralism, you won't hear much about that anymore. They'll be depending on friends, and will be making deals and negotiating with people, trying to build the largest international effort here. So I think it's going to change the tenor of this administration's foreign policy dramatically. Secondly, this team is, I mean, I've heard it commented, but depending on how you like them in peacetime and wartime, you would think this is a very, very good team. It's very experienced. These are very serious people, and they have thought through these things. They have built coalitions in the past, and they have fought a war in the past. As you mentioned, Colin Powell, Rich Armitage at the State Department, Wolfowitz, Rumsfeld at Defense. You got Cheney at the White House. So it's a very experienced group, very deliberate and very serious. So I think for a sort of wartime foreign policy team, you couldn't ask for a better one.
Atlanta, you're next. James Kitfield.
Good morning, Susan. My concern is that I'm concerned about the demographic of the potential U.S. casualties in the instance of the use of ground troops. My understanding is that a lot of the military is made up of minorities, and I'm just wondering about if anybody is concerned about that aspect of that.
That issue's been raised in the past. I haven't heard it raised recently. I mean, actually, I think in some of the frontline ground troops, you would find that it skews more towards white males than it does black, actually, because it's a volunteer thing. So if you want to volunteer for the frontline combat troops, a lot of the inner city kids who join the military really want to get a vocation, really want to learn to do some sort of thing they can then transfer to the economy once they leave the military. So they tend to gravitate more towards, you know, the support functions. But they're clearly, it's going to look like America, and there's, you know, we have a large minority population in this country, and they're proud Americans, and I don't think that will really be an issue. I think everyone's going to be sort of raising their hands and saying, yes, sir, with this. I've seen a total mindset in the country, and I can guarantee you that's reflected in our military. So I see no problem there.
35, and I've seen different numbers, up to 50,000 reservists are empowered to be called into action. Do we know what kinds of roles and functions some of those major call-ups will entail?
It's not yet clear what, you know, exactly what they're going to do with those reservists. I mean, clearly, you can see National Guardsmen on the sidewalks in Washington D.C. right now. I mean, that's an activation of the reserves to active duty. They're going to be helping in the cleanup, I'm sure. They're going to be, you know, a lot of this air cap that's now being flown around the country by fighter jets. Those are usually National Guard units. We usually reserve the sort of the Homeland Defense role for the National Guard. So a lot of those types of things. I also think that the President wanted to send a signal of serious national intent. That is one of the first things you can do there is to call up the reserves, because that really lets the nation know that this is serious. And I think he wanted to do that just like his father did with the Persian Gulf War. But if they are going to move large forces into the Persian Gulf or the Middle East region, as I suspect they will, we're going to require a lot of reservists, because they are in a lot of those logistics support roles, you know, at the ports, in the on ships, and at the airports and things like that. So I think it's anticipation of something bigger to come.
Forest Hills, Maryland, you're on the air.
Good morning. Just three quick points. Number one, where's Louis Farrakhan when we need him? I haven't heard anything from him in New York. He's a big leader of the Islamic nation. I think he could certainly help us out in this particular cause. Number two, if the United States uses Pakistan as a base, so to speak, wouldn't we be putting our troops and our equipment at risk just in case they change their mind? And two, or number three, how about going after Mr. Bin Laden's family? I'm sure they're not hiding up there in the hills. He must have sisters, brothers. I know he has a son. Why can't we detain them for a little while and see what they have to say? I thank you very much. I'll hang up and listen. Thanks.
On the issue of putting troops in Pakistan, I mean, it's huge risk involved in that. The Pakistanis have said privately to the administration they could not ensure their safety. There would be a large portion of the population there that I think would be hostile to anything we're trying to do, and I'm sure that the administration is aware of that. I don't think you would see sort of the buildup of a large sort of permanent type base as we have in the Persian Gulf region. I think it would be more using ports and airfields if necessary as staging grounds. On the issue of going after his family, you know, we have certain values and principles in this country. We have never waged war on people's families. I don't anticipate we'll start that now.
Los Angeles.
Yes, my name is Steve Reynolds. I wanted to comment on the state of what's going on. First, I wanted to say I'm saying a prayer for all the survivors and victims of Tuesday's incident in New York. As an ex-Marine and a gentleman with a combat ribbon and 2 stars, I wanted to find out that if this government can put billions of dollars in space, I wanted to know why we couldn't find 4 box cutters in airports across the country. And smaller situations, if we had a call, I saw on CNN that there was a call into the United States 5 days before this incident, that there were no security procedures done 4 days before it occurred.
this country, as an ex-Marine, I should say, I'm quite sure this country is not ready. Neither is the military ready to go to war, because we don't know who stands with us, beside us, or against us in the situation that we're standing up against today. And one more topic, I wanted to know, what did the government think, or what did the United States think about, or maybe we should think about, what if bin Laden wasn't responsible for this? What do we do next?
Okay, thanks. I'm going to take them in reverse order. If not bin Laden.
Well, and I think that it needs to be said that even if it was bin Laden, it's never been very clear whether he was he's clearly a fundraiser for terrorist organizations, and he clearly is the most visible sort of leader of these organizations. But whether he is operational control is not something that's ever been proven. What is clear, though, is he is sort of rallying radical fundamentalists to a jihad against America. We know that. We know that his fingerprints are all over the bombing in Africa, and we suspect strongly that his fingerprints are on the attack on the Cole last year. So just on that writ right there, we have every reason to go after bin Laden. Whether his fingerprints are found on this or not, he's clearly a leader of a terrorist network. But even getting him will not solve this problem. This network is now spread out around the world in anywhere from 32 to 50 countries, depending on whose intelligence you're reading. And it will be a very sort of significant milestone if we can get him out of the way, but that will not solve the problem, and the administration has been very clear about that. So if it's not him, I mean, I think they're going after sort of international terrorists that's targeting America writ large, and as this coalition builds, I imagine the list will grow, because these other countries will have terrorists that target them specifically. So I don't think it's that important whether his fingerprints are found on this. It clearly, associates involved in this are associates of bin Laden. We know that right now. Whether he has some sort of operational fingerprint on this one, we don't know, but it's not, to me, that important. I think that he is going to be called to task for past deeds and possibly this deed. As far as box cutters, one of the key reforms likely to come from this will be security at airports. We have abysmal security at airports. That is now becoming very clear to the whole country as various reports are aired. I think they're going to look very seriously at maybe federalizing that function. That's been one suggestion. In many European countries, that's a federal function. We do it where the airlines actually have to pay for their own security, and they do it to the lowest bidder. That clearly is not going to be good enough anymore. So I think that's going to get a very close look.
I want to show you in the audience this photograph, which was, it's an AP photo, was in the Baltimore paper today. This is at one airport, McCarran International in Las Vegas, and this is a Southwest agent in front of a pile of things that have been confiscated just over the weekend since the new security measures. And you can see there's lots of knives available in this pile here. She's holding up a knife too. So this is kind of the current conditions before Tuesday of what we were all flying with.
It's amazing. I mean, I'm amazed when I see this. Who thinks to bring knives on airplanes? But again, I don't think anyone thought that would. I mean, no one. This scenario clearly, very cleverly was constructed by the terrorist mind. It did not occur to the American mind that this was something that someone would do. So again, everything has changed, everything is new again, and we'll be looking very closely, I'm sure, at airport security.
San Diego is next.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. First of all, I'd like to say that I think that the major failures that have led to this have been mostly from our intelligence community. It seems as if they just consistently are caught in the dark when these things happen. I also wish to state that I find it quite extraordinary that the president would, in essence, commit us to war almost on his own. My concern is the fact that although we have a very capable defense team, this is mostly in the area of traditional warfare. I hope that they have used their intelligence to address the issue of a different form of warfare, particularly in terms of retaliation inside the United States, and the fact that we certainly have heard a lot about the creation of chemical and biological warfare. I'm hoping that they have extraordinary plans in place to deal with that, particularly in the areas of the use of anthrax and such chemical warfare agents as sarin gas, I'm just curious if your guest has any comments about that.
Well, thanks. Let me turn to today's newspapers on that last point. This is the science section of the Washington Post. Bioterrorism, an even more devastating threat. Experts say it would be a lot easier to conduct, is more likely to occur in the next few years than a replay of last week's terrorist tragedies.
Yeah, as one journal told me, and I said it, I quoted in my story, the mind boggles of what he is going to pull out of his, the rabbit he's going to pull out of his hat next, and clearly the chemical biological weapons of mass destruction are the major concern. I think that is, I mean, he says he's amazed that Bush is taking us to war alone. I think that Bush is going to get a lot of support, as you've seen on Capitol Hill. I don't think that's a problem. And I think that the understanding now is why there's so much support, is that this guy is going to keep probing us and attacking us, whether we enjoy this fight or not. We've seen that. In 2 years alone, we've seen the embassy bombings in Africa, the bombing of the Cole, and now this last horrific event. So it's been brought to U.S. soil, and anyone who thinks that he's finished, or the people who are responsible for this are finished, are mistaken. So that, I think, is really stealing this administration's resolve that something has to be done, because if chem bio weapons, fall into the hands of these people, they will use them, and the casualty figures will be much higher than something we saw even this week. So we do not have sufficient homeland defense in place for a chem bio attack. There has been steps in the last couple of years to put that in place, but it's very nascent. National Guard response teams are now scattered throughout the country, but they're small and underfunded. That will be another thing that gets a very close look.
Mr. Kitfield, on
sure.
the first point on the intelligence community and not knowing more, you have a quote in your story that is from someone you describe as a former CIA official, which struck me. He said, for 2 months we've been warned that something big was brewing.
Right. They knew something big was brewing, and we
But
saw...
they just didn't know what.
They didn't know what, and they didn't think it was going to be on U.S. soil. We've seen them pull ships out of port in the Middle East. We've seen them remove FBI teams from the Middle East who were investigating past terrorist incidents because of the heightened threat from something big brewing. So they knew something big was brewing. In the last couple of years, they've watched as this guy has plotted these attacks. So it was an intelligence failure of rather mammoth proportions, and we have to figure out how to not let that failure repeat itself. Having said that, we have known that this guy was targeting us for 2 years. The intelligence CIA knew where he was at various times in the last year. They almost launched a snatch and grab operation in '98 after the African bombings and pulled back at the last minute because of the fear of casualties. I think that would be launched today. If they had that information, it would clearly be launched. So while it was an intelligence failure, it's an incredibly tough intelligence challenge because these people are clannish, tribal. It's very difficult to penetrate them with human agents, and you can't really do the job just with technical means of eavesdropping.
Charleston, South Carolina. Good morning.
Good morning. I have something quick. Something I heard last night. I don't know if it was true that we were planning on attacking. This is on one of the national cable channels that if they didn't hand over bin Laden, that we would attack in 3 days. I have no problem with retaliation against these people, but my concern is safety at home before attacking outside the United States. Like we have found sympathizers to our plight, I believe that terrorist regime will also find sympathizers from other terrorist regimes. Will they make sure that they find all known terrorists here in the United States to make us safe before going outside and putting us at more risk? That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
It's a very good question, and I'm afraid the answer is we cannot be assured that we're safe, and that's what this is all about. This person has cells right now in this country. That's clear. Not all of them were used in this attack. We don't know what they're plotting. There will be sympathy amongst terrorist groups if there is a widespread campaign, and that is why the admonishment in my article is to gird for. I mean, the administration's been very clear in this. They're girding for war. We cannot be assured that these attacks won't be. There won't be retaliatory terrorist attacks in the United States. But we can be sure if we do nothing. I think it's pretty clear that we will also see continued terrorist attacks in the United States. So it's not like they have a lot of choices as far as. It's very difficult to be safe from terrorism. Our defense in the last 20 years has really been sort of defensive, and once these attacks occur, to sort of take a sort of legal investigative approach to these attacks, find out who did it and bring them to courts of justice. And they have kept getting better at it. We are now shifting to more of a sort of war approach, where this is these are considered military operations, and that gives you much more freedom in terms of rules of engagement. But it is a warlike footing, and it'll be warlike acts that we're going to see. So I don't think we can rule out that there will be more terrorist retaliation attacks.
We'll be live throughout the day. Remember, the House and Senate are not in session because of the Jewish holy days, but we'll be live throughout the day with continuing briefings from official agencies in Washington and their response and future planning. Jemez Springs, New Mexico is next. Good morning. Caller, you're on the air.
Yes, thank you. I would like to address security at our airports and also other modes of travel. It seems, since flying, for example, is a privilege and not a right, it seems to me one of the most cost-effective and efficient ways to screen passengers is through the use of fingerprints or pupil scans. We have the technology available to do these things, and it seems anyone who applies for a passport should be required to submit to such a screening as well. It just seems technology experts from both the private and public sectors should join together to address these issues, and such a collaborative activity seems like a good preventive measure.
Can I pick your brain a little bit about flying being a privilege and not a right? Does the same hold true for riding on trains, driving cars, buses? Are those all privileges for Americans rather than rights?
Well, you know, I really I think that would have to be addressed, but it just seems to me that if we were to look at the whole picture with the appropriate people involved, that we could address, yes, all public, especially international travel is what I'm primarily speaking of.
I see. Thank you.
I saw the numbers for how many flights we have in this country. They're staggering. I mean, that's one of the issues is we have prospered in a globalized world because we're very good at having the kinds of infrastructure that allows movement of goods and services and people. So I think it's going to, I mean, clearly airport security, which I'm not an expert, I'll add, is going to get a very close look here. I haven't heard anything like fingerprints, but the CIA has instituted a tip-off system that goes to INS and Border Patrol and for people coming in this country, and they have, you know, this person, you know, very sanitized version of, you know, we know this is a potential bad guy, and they've turned away because of that thousands and thousands of people who've sought entry. They've arrested some and denied, you know, tens of thousands of visas because of that system. I suspect they are going to be clamping down much more carefully. Whether actually, you know, something as time-consuming and as intrusive as fingerprints, I doubt. But there will be a heightened awareness at ports, airports, for people coming in, and they're going to be tightening up. I think it's something we need to prepare for.
Picking up on Mr. Kitfield's comments about the complexity of this and dealing with foreign governments, Nora Bustani of the Washington Post has been monitoring media in the Arab world. Her story has this headline: Arab media send out dual message on U.S., looking at newspaper and television stations in the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Lebanon, which have run full coverage of the search and rescue efforts. She says there's also been a dual message of condemnation of terrorism and criticism of the United States' role in Israeli-Palestinian conflict, echoed in mosques around the Arab world on Friday.
I mean, it's one of the great challenges and one of the great risks here. Everyone has known that as long as the Intifada lasted and Israel and Palestine were sort of engaged in a low-intensity warfare, because of our support for Israel, we are unpopular in the Arab street. That's just an undeniable fact of life. And one of the risks of this whole war against terrorism is that if it's done in a way that is interpreted as a war against Islam or a war against the Arabs, then we could radicalize the Arab street in the Middle East and threaten the continued rule of Arab moderate regimes there. So it's a very tricky diplomatic high wire they are on right now. But the fact of the matter is, this is not about a war on Islam. It's not that Islam itself has been given a black eye by these radical fundamentalist terrorists. So it has to be made very, very clear in this time when I think we do have a lot of sympathy around the world, even amongst places in the Middle East where we have not gotten a lot of it in the past, that we have to do something. And but it needs to be said again and again. I think this administration is doing it, that this is not a war against Islam or the Arabs. It's a war against a small fringe element of terrorists.
For James Kitfield of the National Journal, next, Kingston, Jamaica.
Yes, good morning. There are a few things that I would like to say. First of all, the possibility that this really may not be bin Laden. I mean, the guy says that he did not do it. I mean, those groups, wouldn't they be the first to own up for something that they did? And also, a lot of people want revenge with the U.S. Saddam Hussein, he could be one of the list of suspects. You have the Somalians. The U.S. killed 10,000 Somalis. You have a lot of people who want revenge on the U.S. Also, it's very strange, things just does not really seem to add up. It seems like the CIA was just so dumbfounded about the whole thing. It seems like they must have known something. I think the government may have possibly been involved in it, as hideous as that may sound. And also, I really don't think that this country is really prepared to go and fight Afghanistan. And Bush is not just talking about fighting Afghanistan, he's talking about fighting all countries that he feels that sponsors terrorism. So basically what he's saying is he wants to wage a war on Islam. And it just goes to show how ignorant a lot of Americans are. They hate Arabs and they want to fight Afghanistan. The Afghans aren't even Arabs.
Thank you. Let's get a response.
There are a number of issues raised in there. Is it bin Laden? I mean, as we said earlier in the show, clearly his fingerprints are on this in the sense that there are associates of his who were involved. Whether he was operational control of this is unclear at this point, which is why I think they have been very forthcoming in saying this is a war against terrorism writ large, not just bin Laden. But we do know that bin Laden has a large writ as far as past acts against us, and the fact that he's denying it now, I think, is understanding that that America's wrath is about to come down finally, and I don't take his denials too seriously. I don't think anyone else does either. On the issue of Saddam Hussein, to me, one of the most serious, outstanding questions of this is whether this will lead to a war with Iraq, because quite honestly, this administration came in with a number of people in that foreign policy team who felt that we had to do something about Iraq anyway. Saddam Hussein is clearly building up, once again, his stockpile of weapons of mass destruction, to include biological weapons. And this may strike the administration as the time to finally come up with a solution to the problem that he presents us, which is that he has had his fingerprints on for instance, on the first World Trade Center attack in '93. Some of the mastermind of that, Mr. Youssef, had some close ties to Iraq that has been revealed since then. So I think that the Iraqi question looms large in this whole debate. And finally, on the issue of will we be going to war against all state sponsors of terrorism, I think the fervent hope is that this coalition will be able to put the kinds of diplomatic pressure once they realize that we're serious, that after the issue of bin Laden and Afghanistan are taken care of, that they will be able to diplomatically get these countries to finally stop giving harbor to terrorists and supporting them financially. If not, as I said, the risk of escalation in this is quite high. She's right.
Munsing, Michigan.
Hello?
You're on the air.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to know what he thinks about the view of private industry and capitalism and profit versus safety. Some of the security measures being implemented now were recommended as much as 10 years ago and were treated as cry wolf because of cost. And the same goes with the government, private industry versus government. We started downsizing, cutting costs, and spending money on pork barrel projects, or either just take, for instance, the latest thing was the so-called tax cut, which most Americans of the medium and lower income didn't see. the government wasn't thinking about that then before this crisis. I'm not trying to say that anything was justified, but I'm trying to say that our emphasis on money has put us more in this position too, because we've always sought to maximize the dollar, and that also influences our political actions across the seas. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, it's hard not to argue that we've cut costs and security at airports way too. That's been too much of a driver, and I think that's about to change. So I think that he has a point. A lot of nations have had terrorist attacks in their airports, like in Europe, for instance, have long since federalized that function. And you go to European airports, and you'll see soldiers with machine guns walking around. It's not a pleasant sight, but it does show serious intent, and the terrorists get that too. So I think, once again, everything has changed. I think that the cutting cost in areas of security will be something that changes rather dramatically from this.
Mr. Kitfield, we have an email from someone who signs themselves Confused Citizen, Austin, Texas. He or she writes, the average American has only a fuzzy idea why thousands of people died last week. I have 3 questions. Does anyone openly speak for their movement? In 300 words or less, what is their message? What are their terms of surrender? I certainly do not advocate surrendering in any way to these animals, but if we are in a war, I would minimally like to know exactly what it is the enemy wants from me.
That's a very good question, and she can count herself in very good company in being confused. This is not a terrorist group that issues demands, and what I think the best way to describe it is the world has become much more globalized. We've got, because of the fall of the Soviet Union and the spread of democracy, the spread of our capitalist model, a lot of societies who are on the sort of wrong end of that tidal wave and feel like cannot compete, poor, impoverished societies with very traditional religious views feel threatened by that. And the poster child for globalization is the United States. We've benefited most from it. We're good at we're probably the best country at many of the technologies that underpin globalization. So I think that there are a lot of societies that feel threatened by this sort of tidal wave in world affairs that we've seen towards globalization, and that we are the convenient target for the fringe and desperate element of those societies that feel desperate and they want to strike back, and we are the target.
Los Angeles.
Yeah, good morning.
Morning.
I heard today a lot of programs, and they put like our priest, Catholic, or they bring some Muslim. They talk about the Muslim, how they are peaceful and how are all this good stuff. They talk about them. But our problem, this one, is not going to finish with this person. They are, as everybody knows, it's not this is the first time. It's been for a long time, a bunch of these terrorists all over. There are all kinds of terrorists in the world. That's fine. There's even here we have it. There's people, they go to school, they kill people, they go to jail, their family, they get upset at them. They don't tell them, you die and you go to heaven by killing kids or by killing innocent. What heaven is that? I mean, I don't understand how those people, if they say they are peaceful, but I know, I lived, I born one of these countries, I raised with them. We scare from them too. Whatever it is true. They teach them in their mosques that it's you die for you go for heaven. But it doesn't matter if you hide behind kids or innocent people. If you go in the army and die, that's fine. But by killing people in airplane and they go bomb with other people, those people, they will die. The innocent people, they go to heaven. But those people, they attack them, they force them. What a heaven is that?
Thank you, caller. Thank you. Appreciate it. Understand the question.
I'm not an expert on Islam, but I am trying to understand, along with every other reporter who's covering this story, and my understanding is that this sort of correlation between suicide and Islam is sort of a bastardized interpretation of Islam. I think Islam is a religion that preaches peace and love and harmony, like most established religions. But clearly there's a radical element of Islam. There are schools in places like Pakistan where they teach this sort of jihad against the West. and they have bastardized it in a way to indoctrinate these kids, and we are seeing the fruits of that, unfortunately. So I don't think this is Islam writ large. This is a fringe element, and I think that's how it should be looked at.
Given the fact that in your reporting you're learning that this country is vulnerable to future attacks of other sorts, are you living your life any differently in the past week?
No, but I'm taking a plane to Moscow next week, and I'm not relishing the thought of flying again after all those horrible images. But no, I think Americans have a lot of resolve, and I think we'll get back to sort of a normal functioning of our lives, but just be that much more vigilant that these kinds of things can happen. And I think we need to be vigilant as a people. But I, for one, don't think we need to hide our homes and not do the normal things we do.
Havelock, North Carolina.
Yes, good morning. Up until the 1970s, I used to work in one E-821 at the Pentagon before I retired, and it kind of hit close home to myself. Now, prior to the Carter administration, we had the CIA that did an operation. It was under different code names, but they used operatives to hire people within countries to eliminate targets. In other words, assassinate terrorism. In the 1970s, we used that effectively against the Red Army faction in Italy. Now, my question is, people talk about this war upcoming. I think this war is going to be what we used to do with the CIA, that they're going to hire what they call terrorists to counter the terrorists that have been attacking us. I think America should stop being naive and wake up, because pretty soon those biological weapons can be in your drinking water and in your air. Thank you for your time.
I think the caller is right. I mean, the administration sent out its senior officials for the Sunday talk shows, and they were asked this question, and Vice President Cheney, as I recall, said as much that they will be relooking this ban on assassinations, lethal force used by the intelligence community.
Which dates from when?
Dates from the 70s. The Church Committee hearings on Capitol Hill revealed some of these past operations, and Americans found them quite abhorrent. I think that we'll still find them abhorrent, but again, if you're on a wartime footing, you relax some of the rules of engagement. That is one that's clearly being looked at. They've said as much, that they are looking at whether we need to relax that. I mean, there are going to be instances now, whether it's the CIA or whoever, where we are going to identify these people, and there'll be no way to go in there and bring them back, and read them their Miranda rights. And they're going to want the freedom of action to do what's necessary to disrupt these people. So I suspect he's correct. That will be one of the casualties of this whole tragedy.
For James Kitfield, next, Palm Springs, California.
Yes, good morning.
Morning.
I think it's imperative that C-SPAN dedicates some of its airtime in the coming weeks to the question of the pros and cons of complete withdrawal from the Middle East. Complete financial withdrawal as well as military withdrawal. Obviously, that's the key. That's why there is terrorism, and I think we need to discuss it fully. And I'd like to know how your guest feels about it. Thank you.
I suspect that as a reporter, I suspect that debate is coming about why are we there? What is it that drives us to be there? And I suspect we're going to find, as we have every time we looked at in the past, that there are very compelling reasons, not the least of which is oil. The society depends on a large proportion of oil from that region, so that depends on us having friends there and moderate regimes. And when those people are threatened, as Kuwait was obviously by Iraq and as Saudi Arabia was, we felt ourselves compelled to defend them. And the reason we have forces over there since then on a permanent basis is because Iraq still represents a threat to those people and to thus our oil supply. We also are close allies with Israel. It has not been our tradition to turn our backs on friendly democracies when they need our help. So that debate, I think, is certainly fair game. Let's talk about why we're there and what keeps us there. I think we'll find that there are very compelling reasons to be there.
Next to Santa Cruz, California. Good morning.
Yes, hello. Good morning. I'm a mentally disabled Vietnam veteran, and I've been unemployed since 1992, dealing with a lot of emotion. My wife is Vietnamese. And I think maybe now the people understand the Vietnam situation because of the terrorist activity that was going on there, and now the country's in control. My wife is still afraid to go back to Vietnam because her whole family is extinct. Since 1954, she was still in her mother's womb. She never saw her father, and she has no family left. And I'm just curious of the terrorist screenings from the Orient that it seems to me been pretty lax, and I'm curious if there has been screenings to these people. Thank you.
I take the point that I think the whole country now is going through a little bit of post-traumatic stress syndrome. I think we've all sort of felt stressed by the events of the past week, and maybe that will give us more sympathy for people who've actually had to fight these wars in the past. I mean, it's been brought home, so I would agree.
Who's the most interesting person you talked to for your article, The Coming Counterstrike?
Oh, I wouldn't want to single any of them out. They're all interesting people. I mean, I talked to...
You cover this field. Was there anyone that you talked to and you said, wow, different perspective or deeper knowledge than I had before?
Well, I mean, I quote in there General Terry Scott, who used to be the head of the U.S. Special Operations Command, who's looked at these issues as a soldier and got a feel for what our military capabilities here are, and that what's been lacking is not capability so much as political will to do these things. But for the reasons we've talked about, the political will has not been there because these things are very risky and perilous. Talked to former CIA Director Jim Woolsey, who makes the point that we have fallen into a sort of routine of looking at terrorist attacks as law enforcement issues and sort of the triggering for a criminal investigation, and that is a scene by which the terrorist organizations writ large have really avoided any major retribution for their acts, and the state sponsors too, because if you're looking at an investigation of a single individual and what his complicity was in an act, you take him to court, but you don't take that up the chain of command to maybe a state sponsor. So I think that is going to be a shift that's quite fundamental in our outlook. So I think that was kind of an interesting point of view.
Earlier, Mr. Kitfield mentioned the USS Cole. If you missed the reports over the weekend, the USS Cole was returned to service a day earlier than had been planned. That day earlier was a little bit symbolic. Under heavy security, went back to sea and back to work again. Next, Altoona, Pennsylvania.
Mr. Kitfield, something occurred to me the other day. Could you comment on something on that matter? You remember a while back, there was an Egyptian pilot who deliberately put his plane into the ocean. Is it possible or that may have been a test run in preparation for what happened on the 11th, that the organization that runs this sort of thing may have trying to find out whether or not their pilots would do what they're ordered to do, even to the point of certain death?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have seen nothing to suggest that there's any linkage there. I mean, clearly, destroying airplanes in the air, even to the point of being on board in a suicide bomber, that is something that has been done and it's been contemplated by U.S. security and national security agencies for a long time. What was different this time was that they would use those planes fully loaded as sort of airborne missiles themselves against key U.S. targets. That has never been done, and so I don't see the real connection there. There's also the mastermind of the first World Trade Center bombing, who's now in jail, went on, and when they caught him, he was plotting to blow a number of airplanes out of the sky in Asia, U.S. carriers. So there's been a question of, and it's so difficult because these networks are so loose, it's very difficult to see if there's any guiding hand behind them. But we've seen them probing for more and more spectacular ways to commit these kinds of horrific, catastrophic terrorist events, and unfortunately they're getting better at it, and which brings us to this rather sad state of affairs.
We were reminded last week that the sentencing for one of the suspects in this criminal approach, as you've talked about, was due to be sentenced on Wednesday. Did that go forward? I haven't seen
Actually,
reports.
I was looking elsewhere at the time, so I couldn't tell you that.
No, I haven't heard a report about that. Farmville, Virginia, you're going to be our last caller for James Kitfield.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you for having me. I have a few points to say. First of all, pains us no end, that our nation has been so badly violated by people who are allowed virtually free access to this great land. They have enjoyed our hospitality, our food, our education, while all the time plotting to execute such cruel and devastating act of terror upon so many of our innocent men, women, and children in the prime of their lives. They have left so many of our kith and kin without fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, children. Arguably, many would have met terrifying, torturous deaths buried deep under the mountains of rubble. Now, my point, there are several points, but there's no time, I guess, to say everything. First of all, I agree fully that we cannot continue to be naive and fight at the different rules when the enemy observes no rules civilized human beings observe. Secondly, we have to look at our immigration policy very strictly. We have to really use a fine comb before allowing people to come into this great land. Now, we have the technology to go to the moon and come back. We have all kinds of technology. Why do we need oil from the Middle East? We can use fusion. We can use atomic power. If people, okay, let me say.
Caller, let me stop you because our time has run out, but thank you. And you've given us a couple of big areas already. So one is immigration.
Well, as we said, I mean, immigration will be something that gets a very close look in this, and I think, I mean, I couldn't agree more on his depiction of really how horrendous this act was. What really has been posed by this act, though, is will it be the rallying call for the world, not just us, but the coalition we're building of 100+ nations, to really say that a Rubicon has been passed and we can no longer allow this kind of activity in the people who conduct it and the states that support them. And I suspect that that might have been a Rubicon that we passed, and in which case they will have been plotting their own destruction with this terrorist act.
James Kitfield covers foreign affairs and national security for this publication, the National Journal. Their cover this week has the Statue of Liberty standing in front of the still smoking rubble of the World Trade Center. It's headlined The Aftermath. Can people find you on the internet?
Yes, J. Kitfield, K-I-T-F-I-E-L-D, at nationaljournal.com.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
We're going to say goodbye to Mr. Kitfield, and we have 1 hour ahead. We're going to do 15 minutes with more news.